We are having Jerry Gidel back to Connected Farmer. He is going to update his numbers on the U.S. planting, and he is going to talk about this changing market of both corn and soybeans. Right
Mhm.
here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe. So, Jerry, first, let us know what happened with this crazy market.
Well, this week has been a interesting one. We've had changing weather around the world here. Argentina finally got some rain that was well needed. Then in the activity in Brazil, it was still pretty heavy rains early in the week, but there is optimism about the rains clearing for next week, and that might be positive on some harvesting and also planting on safrinha corn. But the other big feature is in the U.S. We've had a really dry winter here in many cases in many parts of the country. And we ended up having quite a significant storm that moved through the central part of the U.S. Across Kansas and Nebraska, and had lots of snows in Colorado, and even gave some very good rains in parts of Iowa, Illinois, and the Eastern Corn Belt. And that's what's just definitely a timely situation here this year, as in many cases here we're hoping to get planning started on normal situation in early April, which is just coming up around the corner here at this point. Geez, let's talk about the big news in the markets this week. China. I'm not sure if they were buying to make sure that the U.S. knew that they were going to be still a positive person in the U.S. grain trade here ahead of the U.S.-China talks that are just concluding here on Friday of this week, or if they were just looking at various prices and other things down the road. But they've bought 4 days in a row. Today was probably the most surprising, the 800,000 metric tons they purchased today, brought their total up to 3.9 million metric tons, or over 150 million bushels in corn. Very impressive. Definitely not on. Definitely, I thought we could have some purchases from China. I just didn't expect that type of purchasing potential this week, or from the standpoint of the magnitude of it. So that definitely puts more zing into the U.S. Ending carryover stock talk. Been a lot of talk recently that maybe they weren't even going to ship the stuff they bought, that type of thing. And now we're going to have a great crop in the U.S. because of the rains we had. And then now all of a sudden, carryover stock from this current year most likely is going to have to see the adjustment down at least 200 million on the 1.5 million metric tons that the USDA has been carrying the last couple months. So that's a factor that's definitely was a main kind of talk this whole week.
Yes, and what are the numbers that you are updating for us right now?
Well, because of the export situation with China, that's the number that's I was talking about. We'd taken a 200 million increase, and that I actually thought there might even be something in the ethanol world because we've had a good bounce back in that. But I'm not sure the USDA is going to make a bigger adjustment than 200 million. But that number is for the April supply demand or WASDE numbers, and that. The numbers that are ahead of us, though, is going to be the U.S. planting ideas for corn, soybeans, spring wheat, cotton, rice. Those U.S. Spring crops are going to be updated by the USDA on March 31st. And so that's also a big number out there, big market factor because we go into the 2021-22 crop season here at this point.
Yes, and what do you see at the on the corn side of things? Because I would expect more of an upside with all of these purchases.
Well, yeah, I think the export number that's going to likely rise on the WASI report, and this news of this information has come out just this week, going to provide lots of support on setbacks. I don't think that it's going to steal up the producer's attitude that I'm going to hold on to the remaining corn that he might have, and that. And so that's a factor. And then the other tricky thing in this whole thing is that the USDA's ag outlook numbers that we got or put out there in February, they're looking for 92 million acres, which is up about 1,200,000 or something like that from the final number last year, 1,000,001, and that, and to some extent, we're all going to have a guessing game as to what kind of demand China's going to have next year in their corn demand from the U.S. Because the previous phase one agreements basically were on calendar years. So the 2020 year and the 2021 year are the ones involving in that. And so to some extent, what we end up getting done here between now and September will be a factor along with what might be happening in the fall from there. But the Chinese tend to end up being buyers of beans and shippers of beans versus corn in the fall. So that's a real big factor going forward. But I think that in general, the small carryover stocks around the world, and if something goes wrong here in the U.S., or excuse me, in Brazil with their corn crop right now, both CONAB and the USDA are both in this 108, 109 million metric ton output. Relatively speaking, that's a number that's very tenuous, in my opinion, right now, considering how late they're going to be getting their crop in down there. So, do I think it's hugely below 100 million on their output? No, but at the same time, things are getting a little more interesting. If we took 5 million or 6 million metric tons out of the Brazilian crop, that would put things in a very interesting route for the U.S. going into the 2021-22 year on supplies. Now, the twist of it is that to some extent, the getting back to that planning number we're trying to highlight this week is the fact that the number for 92 million and the U.S. producers have been over the years have shown a tendency when prices are good for both corn and soybeans, they tend to still consider corn their number one crop in most of the U.S. Now, some areas you get into the Delta or some in that, or the Southeast, where beans are very competitive, or maybe even in the northern plains area where beans are yields versus and beans versus corn are still right up there being competitive. There's still a tendency for everybody to anticipate the increases, or the idea that if something goes down that they'll plant more corn. And right now, 92.5, 93 is all we need. We do not need that. We need more beans at this point. The 90 million number that the USDA is using right now is not creating a very big change in carryover stock for the coming year. And I think the protein demand on a worldwide basis has always been continuing to be strong. And if the Chinese are still in the mood of expanding their pork production, they're going to probably need more imports than the 100 million that they are currently using for this season. So that's the one that's interesting to me. But I think there's a lot of people in the trade are not going to anticipate the USDA's planning intentions to go up from the number that we got issued there in the ag outlook, 90 million. And that could make things interesting going on through the spring and summer, because we're going to need to have very, very good yields if we don't plant 90 million, or even, in my opinion, 91 million. Just from the standpoint, it makes things a very close situation going further out and on into 2021-22.
Yes, I think there is room for a greater upside because the South American crop can have reductions both for corn and soybeans that
Mm-hmm.
would be some million metric tons, and it's not a very big number for Brazil, US, and Argentina, but is a volume that several countries combined cannot produce.
Exactly, but you put together both the uncertainties that's happened and hurt the output potential of Argentina, which, yeah, we might have stabilized things with some of the rains this week, but we still hurt potentials in both corn and soybeans in Argentina. Now, if we have the safrinha corn get dinged up because the monsoonal winter rains all of a sudden turn to dry conditions like they do. Now, in many cases, it starts to go down in April. Really, the big question is how quickly does it stop in May? And I think you know it, and I know it, that's a huge difference in what kind of corn output we're going to have in Mato Grosso. If all of a sudden we fall off the table here, and the winter monsoonal rains are very quiet after the 1st of May, that would definitely be a big difference in how much output we'll get out of Mato Grosso from there, because of the fact that we're putting in a huge percentage of this crop so much later than the optimum time. In many cases, I think everybody in Mato Grosso would love to have all their corn planted after beans done 3 weeks ago, really, the 1st of March. Now, that'll creep by a little bit on some of that stuff, but once you get past the 1st of March, you are in a danger zone. So that's going to be a big factor here as we go forward. And I think that maybe the reason why this, even today, when we had a market that was really defensive yesterday and broke some uptime trend lines and stuff like that, with the forecast for next week in the northern parts of Brazil, showing minimal moisture and that. And it's kind of wild. You think, wow, they've had all this moisture up there. That should really carry through into April and May and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, the style of soils up there have not had the tremendous ability to hold moisture. That's the reason, partly because the fact that it's tended to rain on a consistent basis. This year, we just had too much rain for too many days in a row. And I've heard quality issues, and that's another thing we haven't totally figured out, what quality issues have hurt the beans, even on soil, the seed moisture at this point could cause issues going forward. If you store beans at 16, 17% and get it out of the field and you need to try to see if you can dry them out a little bit, because they don't stay in a bin very well when you have that high of moisture in the bean itself.
Yeah, I heard from folks from the Mato Grosso Institute of Agricultural Economics that the first yields in Mato Grosso are well below average. So I think that what's coming next would be even worse, I guess.
That's interesting news, because I'll guarantee we've had such limited yield kind of reports coming out of Brazil this year for some reason or other. And particularly when CONAB decided that they were going to increase their number, not big, but they decided to went from 133 up to near 134 and a half in that last month. Rain makes grain to a point, but the other feature of the thing was that we had a very late planting period on beans, and the dryness basically stayed around through much of January, and then it just kind of flipped. Bang, we had a huge amount of rains, and we've all seen some of the photos up there in Mato Grosso where these flat fields are, have plenty of moisture in them, and ponds and things like that. And then the opposite side, we had quite a difference going to Argentina. So we've had tremendous weather impacts on these crops in South America. So the final numbers here are going to be quite interesting in both countries on both corn and soybeans.
On the other hand, I don't know what would happen with prices when Brazil really start to supply with this coming crop.
Well, I think it's exactly right. When people start to get a final idea on corn and soybeans here, that's the corn is still probably all the way out into late May and that, but beans, we're probably going to get a pretty good feel for that number coming up here in the next month or so as to what kind of potential crop size is really down there. Corn, because of the huge impact of safrinha corn and its output, will probably still be late May, early June, when some of the early corn that's been planted will come in, and we'll have an indication of what they might be getting on the second crop corn. But right now, we're going to be kind of jockeying back and forth to this March 31st date on U.S. plantings, and that corn and soybeans are going to be the highlight, of course. I think they're going to take the total numbers up, while some of the other smaller grains, oats and barley and spring wheat, are all going to slip back a little bit. They're going to be similar to the USDA's numbers that they put out, and probably one of the biggest numbers, other than the big two or so, is going to end up being sorghum numbers in the U.S. We've had some very strong prices, and as we stay at this 7 million number to 7.2 number that's been floating around for a while, that would be a big, there's some changes there. There could be some less enthusiasm about that because of this recent rains that went across Nebraska and Kansas, but because those are in Texas is another area. They're huge sorghum producers. And so I think there could have been a lot more if this dryness had stayed on, because sorghum is a great dry land type of crop, while corn definitely needs a lot more moisture. And so with the rains that we just recently got, that recently dropped across the central U.S., maybe the pressure for more sorghum is going to be less. But we'll have to see, and we'll see what those stocks reports. We'll get into those next week.
Are you recommending caution right now?
Oh, recommendation-wise, I'm kind of still hanging back and waiting to see what to do with the old crop corn and soybeans here. New crop-wise, I'm comfortable with my 20% kind of number right now, waiting to see how these acreage numbers come through, and that, because I think the soybean number, if it is a little lower, is going to be a positive. Plus, we might have these uncertainties about production in South America and that. But from the standpoint of the combination of both acreages and stocks that day will be quite important, because the soybean side of things here, in as I just mentioned, on what South America we just discussed, and also what the acreage situation, if we somehow or other don't see much of an increase in that USDA's 90 million they threw out earlier, I think that's going to keep people nervous, and we'll have to see how it is. But surprisingly, the one thing that will be a huge factor as we go between now and in the 1st of June is going to be how the U.S. plantings go and how many acres get planted. Even the intentions don't tell you exactly what the final number is going to be. We had 97 million projected a year ago on corn, and we ultimately only planted 91 million at the end of the year. So producers have a way of changing their minds depending on how the weather impacts their planning, and also prices. So we'll see what that is for when we see the numbers next week or a week and a half from now.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. Always great to talk with you.
Yes.